G'day and welcome to the future of texturing, proceduralism. So this is going to be a quick introduction to the concept of procedural textures and how they look and what you can do with them. So I am using Substance Player, which is free. You don't need to have a separate Adobe subscription to use it or whatever. It's free. And basically, I've just clicked open and I have loaded in the modern brick generator from Poliigon. And by the way, this is Substance Player, but the exact same settings that I'm going to show you here, all this will be in the plugin. If you've got 3ds Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, they've got plugins. You can actually do this on your mesh within your project. But if you're a Blender user, unfortunately, there's no plugin that works like that, in which case you're going to want to use Substance Player like this and then hit export at the end. But anyways, let's get into the fun stuff, okay? So left-hand side, got my 3D view here, and as I scroll in, you can see it's a little bit chunky, right? A little bit low res. And that's because the resolution of the texture is set right here. So if I set this up to 2048, it is a lot nicer. Now, if you go higher, 4000, 4K texture, it will look a lot nicer, but you can see how long that took to actually refresh there. That's like a good 5 seconds on my computer. And I've got dual 1080 Ti's. So generally what I do while I'm working, I just keep things at 2K. And then when I do my final export, I do it at 4K. And then I get all those glorious details. Anyways, so every generator will have its own settings, but we have at Poliigon, we've tried to label things as clearly as possible so that you can understand it just by reading the label, like mortar width. What does mortar width do? Well, it changes the width of the mortar, right? Pretty simple. Brick rotation variation, right? It should be fairly simple. And we've also tried to keep it consistent across generators. So if we've got 4 different brick generators on Poliigon, and the naming should be pretty consistent. So once you've learned one, it should carry across pretty quickly to the other. But there's very little learning, right? This is a tutorial, but it's like you could just get by without this. It's just like point and click and see what happens, right? But I'll just go through some of the settings and show you what sort of brick you can make. So, okay, so extrusion, that's how far it is extruding from the wall. Like from the mortar, how far the brick is extruding from that. And then extrusion variation is like the variation between those. So you could clearly see that if I turned up that, I can make a very disjointed, poorly looking wall. By the way, if you don't see displacement like this, that's just because I think by default, I don't know why, but Substance Player, if you go Materials, Default, Edit, and then slide this out, the scale by default I think is set to 0, which means you won't have any actual displacement. So I just set this to 1, and then I hide it back, and there we go. Now we've got actual displacement coming off the wall there. Anyways, so if you wanted to go for like a really disjointed one, you'd turn that up, you turn this up, and you would turn up tilt variation, right? And you would get like a really like, hey, who built this wall? They should lose their job kind of look. But anyways, you want to go for something professional? Turn things down, right? You do want to like, don't go 0, right? Because in the natural world, there's always like, as good as some builders are, there will always be like natural, like there's going to be a little bit of disjointedness in the way they lay things, right? The rotation of the brick. So just a little tip there. Anyway, that's pretty simple, pretty easy. Brick bond pattern. So this is a really big one. This is the pattern at which it's laid, right? So the most common one is stretcher or running bond, but you've got header bond, which is like sort of shortened brick, stack bond, which is just like stacked on top, and then you got like these interesting ones, like English bond, which is like a mix of header and running bond, right? And then you've got all these other ones, which I've honestly never heard of before. Flemish, monk. By the way, I'm holding down Control and scrolling will, over any drop down, it'll just cycle through them without you having to click it. So yeah, some really interesting, you can create some very, very cool looking brick just from this. And by the way, these black brick here, if you're wondering like, okay, why are they black? Well, that is controlled in the next setting, bricks. You've got all these different settings here. Don't let it overwhelm you. It's pretty simple to understand. But this black one here, this is just called the header brick, which is only visible for ones that have header. Like if you're in stretcher, you're not going to see header, right? So settings will disable when you can't use them. Anyway, let's say we're looking at this. We've got header brick. By default, use secondary bricks for headers is set to true, which means you could set your own, color for these little header ones here. But I'm just going to set that to false, so they now use the exact same type of brick. Pretty simple, right? And let's set this to English bond. I like that look. It's kind of a mix of like long and short and fat and just sort of stacked on top. It's quite nice. Okay, next here we've got the surface. So the surface is, zoom right on in there, and it's the surface right there. So if smooth will cover like probably 90% of, well, actually no, maybe more like 80% of brick. But then you've got like sand-faced, which is like sort of like more porous looking brick. And by the way, these will look better when you're in 4K mode. At 2K, it's a little bit jaggedy, but when you export to 4K, it'll look a lot better. You've got distressed, which is kind of like it's almost been through the tumble dryer a little bit. Then you've got sand creased, which is this sort of sand wavy effect. You've got rusticated, which is like more porous. Drag faced, I quite like the look of. We have that a lot in Australia. And then we got scored. I love scored as well. It's kind of like a garden type of brick. It's quite nice. But in this case, I'm just going to go with smooth. Flash pattern. So this is, if you crank that up, you can see it's almost like burning the bricks a little bit. Like when they fire them, you get this little like burnt patterns. And that is surprisingly common. So actually, I've just got some, looking at some manufacturer bricks here from a site in Australia. We've got Austral Bricks, which is, just any sort of manufacturer. They tend to list the bricks on their website. Yeah, you can just try to replicate one of them. But yeah, I noticed this one, flash pattern, right? So if you wanted flash pattern, you would just, turn that like that. And then you got variation. Anytime you see variation, by the way, it's just going to mean like whether all the bricks have it or only some of them. So variation turned to 1, some of them have got the flash pattern, and then some of them do not. So that's pretty simple. Burn spots, it's those little tiny little splotches right there. So crank that up, and look, you got splotches everywhere. So I'll just turn that down, and I'll turn this one down a little bit as well. Something like that. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go with drag-faced. I quite like drag-faced. It's kind of nice. Cool. And then for the shape. So the shape is the general shape of the brick. Edge roundness. What is that going to change? It's going to make it look sharper or a little bit smoother. You go too smooth and everything's going to look a little bit cartoonish. But let's go something a little bit sharp. And then the raised lip is the bottom of the brick. You sometimes get, I guess because of the way they're fired and the way that gravity, it's going to make a raised lip on some of them. So if you turn that down, you get that look. Now, these are looking a little bit damaged. So underneath condition, you've now got edge chipping, right? So you can turn that all the way up, of course, and it's going to look crazy. You could turn up variation so that some of them have damage and some of them do not. But let's just turn that down to a reasonable amount, like so. And then spalling. So spalling is almost like, if you can imagine like acid, right? Like eating away at a brick. That's what spalling is going to do. So I would say I use this very rarely. But depending on the brick, sometimes you've got some bricks that have got a little bit of damage to them. And you're trying to replicate that. That's what spalling would be for. Can you guess what cracks does? Pretty simple. Don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that one out. That is cracks. And color. So this is where it's very interesting. This is where you're going to do a lot of your work to like match a manufacturer's brick. Like you can see, I've got a manufacturer's brick right here. And let's say I wanted to match that. So if I've just slide this over a little bit so I've got some room. If I take this here, I can change the base color of my brick and I can go pick. And I can pick anywhere across any window. So I'll just select like there. There we go. That's a little bright. It tends to actually, depending on the pixel that you click on, obviously, it tends to pick a little bit brighter than usual. And I'll go a little bit more saturated as well. I mostly just want the hue when I'm doing the picker. But that's pretty good. Okay, now the other thing I noticed, like looking at my reference here that I'm trying to match, is there's like, some of them are like desaturated and then some of them are really saturated. So what I might do is use the variations here. So these variations will add like, a saturation variation. So some of them, if I turn this up, some of them are going to be really saturated and then some of them are going to be really desaturated. So, and the exact same thing for intensity, right? Some of them are going to be darker, then some of them are going to be lighter. And then hue, it can very quickly turn into a rainbow wall if you go all the way to one end. But that can be used to give, warmer and lighter tones. But mostly I just want to play with a little bit of the saturation and the variation. And this is common, by the way. Like manufacturers tend to, they want to create movement within a wall. Visual movement, it's called, which is where like instead of it just being like just like everything identical and flat, it kind of looks a little boring to the eye. So there's, they often, they do this, give a little bit of variation, or they add another color. So this is what adding another color can do. So let's just turn this to a sort of a darker color like this. And this is exactly what you can see there. The one setting that you want is like regularity. So the higher I set this regularity to, the more of those brown bricks are going to come through. And you can go all the way up to 6, and you can very quickly create some really interesting looking walls that can match just about any reference you can throw at it. Very powerful stuff. Right. By the way, this interior color mode, that's if you're using spalling, right? If you've got spalling set up, and you just want to like, what's the color of the brick going to be in the middle there? Use color 1 if you've got multiple colors, or just same as surface, or whatever. I generally have same as surface, but then again, I don't usually use spalling. Anyways, microsurface. Anytime you see microsurface written anywhere, that's just the reflection, like the roughness. How sharp is that going to be? By default, it's going to be pretty fine, but you can change it depending on what type of brick you've got. If you want to make it look really wet or something, then you could play with that. Header bricks we already talked about. Depending on the type of brick you've got, you'll have that. Mortar flatness. So this is like the displacement of the mortar within there. So if I turn this all the way up to 1, it's very hard to notice on this view, but sometimes you've got like wavy like heights, like kind of a weird splattering kind of look through it. Setting that to 1 will just kind of, there you go. Like that part's dipping in there, and then you set it to 1, and it's all going to be like a little bit more level. Mortar color, yep, everyone knows what that is. Mortar roughness, yep, everyone knows what that is. Finish, all right, finish. So this is cool. I love this. You can give it a painted look, which is very cool. You've also got number of coats of paint, so you can go to like 1 coat, like so. And it'll make it like some parts are like sort of slipping away, and then all the way to 3 coats in which it's like solidly brand new painted. And paint color, right? Obviously, I don't need to explain every little setting, but I'm trying. And then the paint finish. I tend to like satin. That's just the reflection roughness of the paint. But you can override it there, by the way. These are just like some like drop down settings. Whitewash, which is for a lot of like interior brick, will have like a whitewash pattern to it. You can change this, you can change the contrast, you can change the scale, some parts having whitewash and some parts not. Pretty simple. And then you've got dirt, whether or not it's looking aged or brand new. That one's pretty simple. It's just 1 slider. And then shading, these are like shading settings, which you've got DirectX and OpenGL. Blender uses OpenGL, by the way. So if you wanted to export to Blender, you'd have OpenGL like that. And that's basically it. The only other one I think I just forgot, I just remembered, is Reclaimed, which is like for making it like industrial kind of, like it's like old brick which has been reclaimed. That's my understanding of it, but it's like got little bits of old cement and stuff stuck to it, and it's just got 1 slider there to change that. But anyways, the point of this was just to give you, a brief overview of what all the little settings and things can do. It's very, very cool. So if I was going to do a final export, I would set that at 4K. And then I would go to export as bitmap. And then you get all these confusing looking things, but this is like, the folder you're going to put it in. And I tend to export at TIFF, so it's nice, like 16 bits, right? Just tends to look a little bit better. You can export all the outputs like that, but I tend to just use, generally speaking, base color, normal, roughness, and height. And then I would just hit export. And then it's going to go bada bing, bada boom. Of course, it's going a little slower, I think because I'm recording. But anyway, and look at that. Ta-da! And so then you would just use those in Blender like you would normally. In fact, let's just, you know what? I'll throw this in at the end here because there's really only like one thing you need to know about adding this into Blender here for those of you who are watching this and are Blender users, which is a lot of people, right? Which is why I figure why not just do it. Anyways, I want to add my material in here. What do I do? First of all, make sure I've got the preferences. I've got the add-on that's called Node Wrangler. Make sure that's enabled, and then go to the shading settings right here. And then with my principled shader here set, hit N on the keyboard, N for Nelly, Node Wrangler, and then add principled setup. So I click that, and then I just take the destination of those maps there. I'm going to select all those and then hit principled. And that's that. I've exported it, I think DirectX, so this normal will need to be flipped around. But that's basically it. And now I've got my material inside of Blender. And isn't that all wonderful? But that's it, guys. If you want to see some more tutorials, I'll put some links to the other generators underneath this file, underneath this video, so you can like learn how to do all the other generators. But thank you all for watching, and I hope you have fun with the generators. Bye.